Plotkoy asked Karl, "Do you think racists should go to jail and have their stuff taken? I believe you held those feelings at one point." And Karl says, "What the hell? No idea what you are talking about. You have completely confused me with someone else." Plotkoy says, "Oh, that's good." Rory Blackburn says, "Karl, I hope you aren't taking too much Valium now. It sucks to lose, but you can bounce right back." He says, "Thanks. I've been pretty good with it, to be honest." So that's weird because I assumed this was like a prescription thing where, you take it once a day at the same time or something like that. But the way Rory talks, it seems like he's spent some time in the Discord and he knows that Karl uses Valium sort of willy-nilly. That's how it comes across to me. I'm not saying that Karl does that, but that's how that comes across. And Rory is worried. He's like, "Oh, geez, man, I know things are rough right now. I really hope you're not abusing the Valium. I hope you're not taking too much to take the edge off." Karl Jobst has recently taken a massive, massive L at the hands of the God Gamer Billy Mitchell, who always has a plan, more than likely to the tune of over 1 million Australian dollars. There's the 350,000 or so in damages that he was ordered to pay. He'll now have to pay Billy's court costs, which if they're anything similar to Karl's court costs, looking at around $500,000. So right there, looking pretty easily like he might have just lost over $1 million USD. So I just want to take you on a journey through Karl Jobst's Discord, starting from a few months ago when he was very confident and had a great outlook on how things were going to go down, leading up to a few days before the court case, and then, of course, afterwards. It's a roller coaster of emotions for poor Karl Jobst. Right here, you might have seen this screenshot from his Discord. Karl says, "Okay, so here is what is interesting. We fed all the court transcripts in AI. It said that there is no scenario where I lose. It said even if Billy wins, the damages will be nominal and he will have to pay my costs." And when I first saw this, I thought it might be fake. It just seemed too absurd. But I'll show you later. Nope, these are in his Discord. I found I found it myself. Here I got a couple of nice memes that I stole from the Discord while I was perusing. I mean, is this not just the coolest guy ever? Here we got the Virgin Karl versus the Chad Billy. Exposed in my 2-hour video. Begs for money, loses. But the evidence. Silly Bitchel. Stupid accent. Billy is finished this time. One of like 100 people with damn 52. And Billy Mitchell, gamer of the century, hair perfect, records perfect, king of Kong forever, wins 1 million quarters in court. That's why they call me Billy Mitchell. A true patriot, as shown by his necktie. Born to win. Very factually accurate meme there. Again, like, can you get cooler than this guy? Just a true patriot. And one more. Okay, so now we're getting into the Discord. These were from September of 2024. Karl says, "Judges are supposed to refrain from judgment till they hear both sides. My judge seems pretty good, TBH." And you'll notice after the the court orders him to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, his opinion of the judge changes quite a bit. But beforehand, he thought, "Oh, this judge seems pretty smart. I like him." I just don't think they understand how smart I actually am. I won't talk about trial specifics, but the judge is very smart. My barrister is very smart. And also, here he's saying his lawyer's very, very smart. They know what they're doing. Another thing that he'll change his opinion on. Billy's barrister is very smart, but unfortunately, he is quite ignorant. Billy's barrister did not understand exactly what type of person I am. I am autistic. Okay, let me say one thing. I'm smart. I'm smarter than Billy Jr. Far smarter. I just don't think they understand how smart I actually am. I mean, this is rough. Just gloating about how smart he is. Leading into a court case, he's just assuming he's going to win, and then he gets absolutely dumpstered. But he was really talking himself up. Billy's barrister, no, I remember that one. I am very, very specific with my use of words. Also, the first few days he showed disgraceful court etiquette, not bowing to the judge when entering and leaving the room, and the fact he kept leaving the room while it was in session was also not a good look. It was clear he doesn't respect the court. The way the judge walks into the courtroom is pretty badass. I mean, he's talking up this judge quite a bit. Very smart, he's badass. I believe he knows he is not in a good spot. He doesn't want to be there. Obviously, that's about Billy Mitchell there. Again, Judge is real smart. And a meme, my boy's wicked smart. I don't think the judge will find Billy credible, and if that's the case, he loses instantly. Now, if you saw Karl's tweet after losing, according to him, the judge took everything Billy said at face value and trusted him on everything. Now, I don't really know how true that is. To me, it seems like it wasn't, and mostly he just went by the potential reputational damage of saying that Billy led to Apollo ending himself. Seemed like that was really what everything hinged on. Transcripts can be bought. I will be using the transcript when I make vids about the trial. So he was planning to make multiple videos about this. It sounds, of course, he said if he wins, he's going to be a very, very sore winner. He's going to rub it in, all that sort of stuff. I don't know how many vids making the how many vids using the transcript he'll be doing now that he's lost. I don't know why the judge is making this such a public spectacle. So, and then here we're in March, getting much closer to the actual sentencing or the damages, whatever. I don't know the technical terms, but I don't know why the judge is making this such a public spectacle. The judge didn't have to give 2 weeks' notice and advertise that it would be on WebEx, etc. The judge is looking to make this a public event. Yes, this decision does have good implications for me. My judge was very switched on, and Billy acted insane on the stand. So again, the judge very switched on, very smart, very badass. And now he's talking about the video that he's going to be releasing the day of the trial. And if you didn't know, he uploaded a video right after he lost that same day uh, with a sponsor on it because there's a sponsor obligation, according to him. And he quickly took it down because people were like, I don't know if this is really appropriate for you to be doing this right now. People are very mad at you, so he took it back down. But this is him talking about the video before that. Yeah, I got a sponsor for it, lol. This particular sponsor has been waiting ever since trial because they specifically wanted to be in this video. You know what would be funny? If I won, but uploaded the video that day with the title being I lost and a pic of Billy saying he won in the thumbnail. Well, you know what? You could do that, and it wouldn't even be a joke now, Karl. I mean, that would have been funny if you if you had done that after you lost too, and did it as an April Fool's joke. I will honestly never have an opportunity to do a bigger April Fool's joke. And then somebody asks him, "What if you lose? Will the sponsor back out?" Karl says, "No." It says he's working very hard on an unrelated video. Monday, I recorded the vid already. It will be 35 minutes long, full of juice. He's hyping it up. The question you're going to ask is, how does Karl keep stumbling into these weird situations? Because this one is just absolutely insane. If this doesn't make Australian national news, I will be shocked. So this video that he took down the same day he uploaded it, he thought quite a bit of it. He was very excited to release it. I will get sued. I'm like 99% sure. The guy is a total con artist. So this to me really goes to show how confident he was that he was going to win because he's already taking on a new adversary that he thinks is going to sue him. So he's like, oh man, I'm like the Terminator of online liars and con artists. I'm just going to keep taking them on. Well, I don't know if we'll ever see that video again now. I don't know if he's going to be up for taking that risk of another lawsuit. And then somebody asked him, do you ever run scripts for videos like this past a lawyer, or is it not worth the expense? He says, no, I don't, because screw lawyers and what they think. If I want to say something, I will say it. Screw letting other people tell you what to do. A lawyer will always tell you to say nothing. Who wants to live by that principle? You've probably seen that one. I think Billy might have even posted that on his Twitter. I hate every single lawyer except the ones that represent me. Unless I lose, and then I will hate them too, lel. And somebody asks, wait, you're getting sued again? He says, probably will be, referencing the video that he took down. I do hope the judge makes an example out of Billy. And just hang on to that, where he's saying he hopes the judge makes an example out of Billy, because later on he will be complaining that the judge made an example of him. So for him, it's totally cool to hope that that happens to Billy. But then if it happens to him, what an affront. What an injustice. If it happens to Billy, oh, that's awesome. I hope that happens. But if it happens to me, that is completely messed up. And then Kojani says, I hope the judge spanks him, TBH. Karl says, just keep in mind, I could lose. Kojani says, yeah, but instead of that, I hope the judge literally spanks Billy, like literally smacks his butt. And Karl says, Billy Prob won't even show up. For some reason, he thinks Billy's not even going to show up to the hearing. Not sure why that is. And you notice, there's a lot of gay undertones going on in this Discord. They like to talk a lot about the male appendage and that sort of thing. You know, not hating, just not really something I'm into. I find that a little bit odd, but you do you in your own Discord, fair enough. Ava says, I just realized something very important with the Day 7 proceedings. It's very strongly implied that the judge will take the general impression that a reasonable viewer gets from the words into consideration, which theoretically, to the text messages in the same way, meaning BB's analysis and deconstruction of the text messages is basically worthless. Karl says, yes, it doesn't matter what Billy meant. All that matters is what a general reader of the messages perceives. Even the judge openly stated what the words mean on their face. And then again, he's very excited. OMG, I should be able to get the audio of my trial. Well, we all got the audio and the video. And here he says, I'm drowsy from too much Valium. And I looked it up quickly. I'd heard of Valium, but I didn't really know what it was. Apparently, it's for stress and anxiety, that sort of thing, and it makes you drowsy. He goes on to say, I might call the judge and ask if I can sleep in. I never said Mitchell was responsible, referencing Apollo Legends ending himself. Envy says the judge interpreted that way, no? Karl says, I implied the settlement was contributing factor with his health issues. The judge interpreted that way, which we disagree with. The judge agreed Billy expressed joy over the thought of Apollo's death. Of course, there were those text messages where I don't remember exactly what Billy was saying, but he's saying, well, my wife found a Reddit post where they said Apollo Legend ended himself, and he was happy about it in those text messages. Bald Eagle Boy says, if my lawyer lost a case and were telling me to appeal, I'd get a second opinion on it from someone else. And obviously, this is after the hearing. And Karl says, well, that's what you do. You get advice from an appeals specialist. So already looking at appealing the decision. He hasn't spent enough time, energy, and money on this. He wants to see if he can sink a little bit more into it. Happy Alcoholic says, am I crazy? I don't feel misled at all and feel like I remember this all being part of the legal issue. Joined because I want Karl to know not everyone is out for blood. So obviously after Karl lost, lots of people were surprised because they were under the impression that this was about Karl saying Billy Mitchell had cheated. And, that's pretty much agreed on that he did. But it turned out that no, this court case was about Karl saying that Billy contributed to Apollo Legend ending himself. And this guy is just saying, well, I didn't think it was about cheating. I knew that this is what it was about. Well, from what I've seen, you seem to be in the minority. Happy Alcoholic goes on, I am glad to see that it's not all pitchforks. I have seen the comments and wanted to throw my word in there in a place he may see it. However unlikely that is, I enjoy his content and am gutted for him. And Karl says, thank you. He really appreciates the support in these dark times. Alan Smithy says, I remember at the time finding it notable that there was no video game player of the century remark. Billy Mitchell claimed he was the video game player of the century, and I think that it turned out that that wasn't even a real award, that he basically made that whole thing up. He avoided that because if Carl's barrister had the opportunity to go down the player of the century rabbit hole, it would completely destroy any credibility Billy has as a witness. I don't know if the evidence was entered beforehand, but if he did mention that, I'm pretty sure it would allow Carl's barrister to have demonstrated that Billy Mitchell fakes evidence. But I'm not a lawyer. Carl says, nah, he would have lied, and the judge just would have believed it. The judge just literally accepted everything that Billy said was true, except when it was convenient for him not to and claim Billy was just making mistakes. So he'll bring this up quite a few times that the judge just believed everything Billy said at face value. And I don't really know how relevant that was because to me, the crux of the issue was that Karl Jobst made it seem like Billy Mitchell contributed to Apollo Legend ending himself. And that was not part of Billy Mitchell's reputation before that. Yes, he was known as a cheater and a liar, but he wasn't known as somebody who contributed to the death of another person. And that's what really impacted Billy's reputation in the eyes of the court. And that's what the damages were awarded for, mostly. Carl says, nah, he would have lied, and the judge would. Oh, sorry, I just read that. Matthew Christopher says his report was extremely emotionally written, like his drinking bud was harmed, and he personally was affected. I didn't appreciate the lack of objectiveness. So now they're talking about, oh, you know, that judge that Carl said was so smart and turned on or switched on and badass. Actually, I don't think he's really objective. I think he was emotionally impacted by this, and it clouded his judgment. CMDR says, is there a route to appeal this madness? Carl says, the judgment reads very biased, which honestly may have been a big mistake. You can appeal, yes. I am looking into that option at the moment. He gets 4 upvotes for that. People are like, oh, yeah, appeal that. Appeal can't backfire. Like, they can't raise the judgment or anything, but it could cost you more time and money, no? Matthew says, at least if an appeal is in flight, doesn't that freeze the court-ordered payment? Carl says, yes. So maybe that's partially motivating Carl here. He's like, well, even if I don't win, maybe I can pause having to pay for a little bit, pump out some videos, stock up some cash, start making payments. I don't know. MF says, but lawyer costs will double if you appeal, right? And Carl says, no, the appeal is just like a 1-day hearing. And from what I've heard, it's possible that the appeal can be a 1-day hearing, but it can also drag out quite a bit and be a much longer thing. You can appeal technical decisions, can't appeal the judge thinking Billy is credible, though. Again, he's saying, no, the judge really thought Billy was super credible and believed everything he said. There is no real grounds for the 300K based on precedent, TBH. Technically, it should only be in aggravated, but it's quite obvious that's not the case. So now he's questioning the judge's judgment. Again, he's like, what is he even basing this off of? There's no precedent for this. He's just pulling this out of nowhere. It's evident. An appeal is likely just need further counsel from a KC. Billy had 2 event organizers show up and both didn't know about my vid and said they haven't booked him for other reasons. So that was part of how Billy Mitchell said that he was damaged as he lost gigs because of the stuff Carl said about him. The evidence from unbiased parties was completely disregarded in place of Billy's testimony. So I say, and the judge dismissed everybody who was unbiased. Like, no, I don't want to hear that. What's Billy have to say? That's my guy. And now he's talking about the video response that he needs to make. I need to make a good response. My response vid will be important. Yeah, I can agree with that. I think this really damaged your reputation, and you know that's probably your best shot at maybe winning some people back over. Bald Eagle Boy says, I think the best apology would have been unassociated with something else and clearly directed at Billy. Carl says, I don't have a problem correcting mistakes I've made. That would have been the best apology, yes. Never complained about the retraction or asked me to do it differently. So, Carl made his retraction. That was 28 minutes into a 30-minute video and was about a minute long. Didn't go into much detail. And obviously, people going in had no reason to know, oh, hey, he's going to respond to the Billy Mitchell stuff here and correct the record. Duskfall says, the funniest thing about this whole situation is I learned Karl used to be a pickup artist. And Karl Jobst says, I wasn't. And uh, you may or may not have seen it, but there's these really cringy clips of Karl just going up to women in public and saying, hey, I don't want to bother you, but I just thought you're really, really cute. That's all he does. He just says that to people and then walks away. And there's nothing more to it. He does it, I don't know, 5, 10 times in one video. But Karl says, I taught building confidence, getting over approach anxiety, just so you can actually meet people. And Duskfall says, that's a pickup artist. Karl Jobst says, no, a pickup artist tells you how to have sex with women. I was telling people how to overcome their fear of going up to a woman. So I guess his argument, no, I don't do the pickup artistry. I just do everything leading up to when you pick up them. I just do the first little baby step to it. They are two separate concerns. I always just talked about building confidence. Like, would you call a psychiatrist a pickup artist if they help someone who is socially anxious? I mean, I probably wouldn't call a psychiatrist that, but they don't specifically help people who are anxious about talking to women. Robo Guy says, person who has worked in the legal sector for many years cannot wrap his head around people not liking someone who is known to be extremely litigious. The judge said that Karl had a clear disdain for Billy Mitchell and he couldn't have his mind changed on any of it. He was arrogant and set in his ways. Alan Smithy says, he also wants Karl to change his opinions on everything, strong views that he rarely, if ever, changes. He quotes from the judge. And Karl says, yes, my opinions on Billy have not changed. Why does that mean anything? I may have good reasons for not changing my opinion on Billy. Why does that mean anything? Well, I mean, maybe legally it shouldn't mean anything, but you have to realize that your conduct is going to impact what people think of you. And even if the judge is trying to be as impartial as they possibly can, if you come across as an arrogant prick, it could only hurt you, right? At best, it's going to do nothing, but at worst, it can hurt you. The judge also somehow thinks that in a deposition done after this incident, he says the Twin Galaxies case was the most stressful thing ever. That's okay, because the judge can see inside Billy's heart, and he knows the Karl stuff was far more stressful. Billy also somehow has very bizarre defamation-related medical issues. He claimed that the Karl defamation caused him sickness, and the Twin Galaxies ban also ended in his dermatologist not seeing him. I hadn't heard that till I came across these in the Discord. Apparently, Billy Mitchell lost his dermatologist due to the defamation of being a cheater in video games. I don't know how true that is, but that's what they're saying here. Karl says, but he was asked about lawsuits. The judge just makes up that Billy was talking about cheating. When he specifically asked about lawsuits, David Race didn't even make cheating videos. He wasn't asked about cheating. He was asked about lawsuits. It's all just more for appeal. The David Race thing was for recording calls. The Karl Jobst thing was Apollo Legend. The judge's reasoning is insane. Matthew Christopher says, nobody had a problem with the location of your apology and retraction during the proceedings, right? When did it become an issue? It wasn't a standalone video. Karl says it became a problem very late into the lawsuit, like 2 years in. The retraction was never addressed by Billy until 2 years in. Then it was a problem. Now, I don't know how true this is. Maybe they never said anything about it and waited till later on. Maybe they didn't know about it, right? Because it didn't become a problem until very late in the lawsuit. But did you make a big deal of it? I mean, I'm assuming he did. Say, hey, I made this retraction. But I got to be honest, if I saw that, I'd be like, well, I don't really think much of this. And it seems like it was the judge that was the one that had a problem with it. And he was like, this is such a like backhanded retraction. It is completely worthless. And the fact that you're counting this as a retraction actually counts against you. Pretty sure the judge saw my human side when I broke down crying. He thinks Billy being angry at me is valid, so Billy can be angry. Me being angry at Billy is not valid, so I'm wrong for thinking it. Oh, Carl said, at least when I cried, the judge looked at me like a real person and recognized me as 1/16th of the person that Billy Mitchell is. Saw a little bit of humanity in me. And again, he says, you know, Billy being angry at me, that's allowed, but me being angry at Billy, that's not allowed. I mean, I didn't really see that reflected in what the judge said, but I don't know, maybe. Robo Guy says the GoFundMe and the class action lawsuit meme should only take a few seconds to dispel. And Carl says, class action lawsuit? What is that referring to? Robo Guy says, I saw comments from people who said they thought the donors could start a class action lawsuit against you. I haven't heard anything about this. I mean, it doesn't sound very serious to me. I don't think there's merit for a class action lawsuit, really. And it would be a lot of work for a bunch of people to split up 200K. It's probably all going to go to lawyers anyway. I wouldn't think it's worth it for anybody to do that. Sigma Male says a private agreement's terms still have to abide by law. You can't just agree to whatever. And Carl responds saying there is a never mention Billy clause. Literally, never mention Billy or you owe me 25K for each mention. It's not a don't make vids about me. It's never mention my name in any context on any platform ever, with each breach amounting to 25K. So Billy and his lawyers offered a settlement to Carl at some point, and that was one of the terms is that you can never bring us up, or you can never bring me up, or you have to pay 25K each and every time that you do it. And Carl he's not down with that, and Sigma Male is saying that private agreements terms still have to abide by a law. So I assume the implication there is that it would be infringing on free speech. But Carl doesn't have to take that. He would be agreeing to censor himself there by doing that. So I don't see how that's infringing on free speech. Like I would think you could agree with someone. I don't know. You guys get into an embarrassing fight on Facebook or whatever, and you agree to each other. Hey, we're never going to talk about this ever again. You sign a contract for that, right? Like you'd be allowed to do that. I would think. I could be wrong, but I would think that's how it works. Sigma Male says, I'm not going to lie, from a freedom of speech First Amendment perspective, that sounds borderline illegal. How can that be allowed? Carl says, yes, I thought that too. And Uncle Bob says kind of what I was saying. How? You don't have to agree to it. And Carl says, I forget what my conclusion was, but it's an insane thing to agree to. Sky says, I simply hope that you get the best legal advice now, Mr. Jobst, moving forward. Carl says, same. The Lone Wolf says, I hope you only had to pay your lawyers if you won. And Karl Jobst says, but trust me, I'm okay, whatever really happens. And if you weren't aware, at one point in time, Notch, the creator of Minecraft, offered to pay for Carl's legal fees. And I saw a video where Carl was talking about it, and for a few months, he did pay for his court fees, and that's why Carl got such expensive lawyers. He's like, well, if a billionaire offers to pay for your legal fees, you're going to get a good lawyer, right? So again, there he was saying he had really good lawyers. He was very excited about how good his lawyers were at that point in time. But then, according to Carl, a few months later, Notch's, I think he said it was Notch's like manager or something like that, stopped paying for stuff. And so he's like, oh, shoot, I guess I have to pay for this stuff on my own. And then later on, I think when the more lawsuits got piled on or something, I don't remember exactly what prompted it, but Carl reached back out and said, hey, any chance you could pay for my legal fees again? And they paid for a little bit then again. Karl Jobst says, biggest takeaway is just a drive to not waste my potential. Through grief, the masculine deepens. So, I mean, I never picked up on this from Carl, but he's big on the masculinity type things. And he's saying this grief is going to deepen his masculinity, make him more of a man. I'm finally mentally getting strong enough to start conceptualizing my response. I don't think it matters when it is released. I think it will be fine. So it took this is on the 3rd, 2 days afterwards. I'm finally at the point where I can start conceptualizing my response to all of this. And he says, I'm not reading comments or anything. And he says that here, but at certain times it's pretty clear that he is at least reading some comments. To be fair, he could be making an effort not to read them, and he just sort of accidentally is coming across them. And I'd imagine on some level it's unavoidable for him to see them if he wants to use any of his social media at all. So, that probably is true that he was, or it could be true that he was making an effort not to see them, but it turns out that he definitely saw some of them. I think I will do more gaming content in general, but I don't want to stop doing some investigations about random stuff. I just don't have to be so inflammatory. So here, he's kind of admitting that he was very inflammatory with what he said about Billy Mitchell. Vincent Van Vega says, how are you holding up? And Carl says, I am getting better, but it will be tough until my response, I think. The Jackson says, if you do continue with investigations, you should look into defamation insurance. And Alchemast says, wouldn't it be possibly really high, though? And Carl says, I don't need insurance if I don't have assets. Well, so I don't know how much of a joke that is, but it sounds like maybe after all of this, he's not going to have too much in the way of assets. He's going to be given everything he owns over to Billy Mitchell. After this, insurance will be tough to get, I reckon. And I would think that's probably true. I don't know how many people would want to sell Karl Jobst defamation insurance at this point in time. Seems like probably a losing proposition. Jackson says, still worth a quick look, IMO. Better safe than sorry if you can. And MF says, most insurances would have probably dropped you during the case if possible. And I don't know how true that is, but based off of my experience with health insurance providers in the United States, well, not really my experiences, but the experiences that I've heard about, my brother actually for sure had and his parents had that issue. So maybe I wouldn't put it past an insurance company to pull some stuff like that where, oh yeah, you can pay us every month, but oh, there's even a chance we'll have to pay anything. Yeah, no, we're gonna have to drop you. And Nathany here says, Carl is still awake? Carl says, yeah. Nathany says, is your sleep schedule usually this off? Carl says, yes, though I can't sleep well at the moment. Nathan, he says, that sucks. I can't imagine. Hope you're giving your mind some time off. It's been a long couple days. And Carl says, I'm just thinking about my response vid. Thinking about it is keeping me awake. I know it will be fine after, but until then, it will be crap. And Chloe asks, have you started the response video yet? And Carl says, yes, in the sense I'm scripting in my mind. First, have to write a script, which will take days. I think it will be out next weekend. Chloe says, I don't understand how the whole thing of people immediately jumping to conclusions without waiting for both sides happens in literally every single situation, pretty much. People act pissed off after the fact about how people should have waited, and then it just happens again. Carl says, well, I hope this is a case where people realize a mistake. Chloe says, I hope so too. And Carl says, and give some leniency to mine. I will dispel most crazy narratives. Not that I know what they are, because I'm not looking into it. So again, saying, I'm not looking at the comments. I can't handle it. it's too stressful to look at any of this. I will just lay out everything. People might find the conspiracy theories to be really stupid after. To me, that comes across as pretty arrogant. He's like, oh yeah, I'm going to make this video and the haters are going to feel really stupid after that. It's like, bro, did you not at all learn to just maybe tune down the arrogance a little bit? But it doesn't seem like it. Not Billy replies, then how would you dispel the narratives? This is like watching a slow train wreck. And Carl just says, by telling the truth. Blofeld says, I think replaying your own words from previous videos will go a lot of the way. I get the impression a lot of the complaints are coming from people that either haven't watched all your videos or were not paying attention to what you did say. You were clearly walking a fine line regarding what you could or could not commit to saying, and explaining that thought process alongside what you actually said at the time will help. Carl says, yes, of course. Most comments I have seen are false about why the GoFundMe was made, etc. They just don't go back and watch the vid where I promote it and what it was about. It was clear as day when I made it. And I think in the video where he promoted the GoFundMe, that was mostly true, that he, at the very least, he did mention that it had to do with the Apollo Legend stuff, and that video did not give off the impression that it was all about the cheating stuff in the same way most of his videos did. Pain and Virtue says, personally, it was clear to me this was a defamation case and feared the worst for you, as the law typically won't take into consideration attempts to smear the character of the person if it's a clear-cut case of information being misrepresented. Feel for you, Karl. Tough one, but as soon as what I realized the case was, I did fear for the worst. So, I mean, he's not very clear there. He says he thought it was about defamation at first, and then he realized what it was about. Well, it was about defamation. Just the subject, the particulars of the defamation is what people weren't sure about, or were wrong about, I guess. And Karl says, yes, but this judgment is ridiculous, and not many people even understand the arguments. So again, he's casting aspersions on what the conclusion the judge came to. This judgment is ridiculous. What does this judge know? Alchemast says, I mean, I understand the argument of the retraction being bad, because of course it was 28 minutes into a 30-minute video. Pain and Virtue says, I think if the retraction had been the centerpiece of a video or the main component, it may have swayed him more. Who knows? Surprised at the extent of the damages, though. And Karl says, obviously in hindsight, you can say XYZ would have been better, but at the time it seemed fine. Well, you didn't really run anything by lawyers, so you're just going off your personal opinion that it seemed fine. Like, in my mind, if you're going to say over and over again in multiple videos stuff about Billy Mitchell, and then the retraction is just like 1 minute at the end of a 30-minute video, you're not really trying to give those equal weights at all, right? You should try to make as much of a noise about your retraction as you made the initial claim. I would think if you're trying to show good faith effort to truly retract and take back what you said, should be a similar level of noise and effort retracting it. But obviously that was not the case. Alchemist says, so what the judge said with the facts of the timeline of the retraction was true? And Karl says, probably. Alchemist says, what the judge said with the timeline was really bad. Keemstar, of all people, was telling you it wasn't true. And Karl says, no. Keemstar said Billy said it wasn't true. Billy also said he didn't cheat, though. Okay, well, from what I've heard, and I think Karl says it later on in here, that it was basically just a Reddit comment that he went off of. And I mean, it really is a Reddit comment all that different from Keemstar saying somebody said something? Like, I wouldn't draw any conclusions based off either one of those, personally. I had no reason to trust anything that came from him. I shouldn't have said it in the first place with the evidence I had, though I wouldn't have believed anything Billy said. That's why I checked with the brother of Apollo Legend, I believe he's talking about there, is after Keemstar talked to him, he said that he would cut that part of the video and ask Apollo Legend's brother about it. And then he republished that without ever getting an answer from Apollo Legend's brother. Volano says, also, I feel like the claim, that is probably true, didn't cause any defamation to Billy, since you can't make trash look worse. Pain and Virtue says, not how the law sees it, though. And Karl says, it does, though. Australian law factors in existing reputation. And so did the judge. The judge mentioned, when he said what the damages were, that, yes, Billy Mitchell did have a reputation for being a cheat and a liar, but he did not have a reputation for leading to the death of Apollo Legend. And that's a very serious stain on anyone's reputation, the idea that they contributed to somebody ending themselves. And that's what the damages were in large part based on. There is a difference between something being defamation and someone suffering damages, a clear distinction. Yeah, sure, that's true. I don't know if you actually need, I think in Australia you don't actually need to prove damages. It just, the idea that the defamation that somebody said about you could cause damages. Foca Arpa says, how much time you reckon the appeals will take? I feel like if you win an appeal, that'll settle the internet mob. Karl says, an entire appeals process would take a year, but I don't think mob is upset with the judge's decision per se, just their recollections of events, which I can correct. So, okay, yes, he's going to correct our recollection. We've all got it wrong, and Karl's going to set us straight. And so here he does say that the entire appeals process would take a year versus, before he was saying it would be a day-long thing. So he meant just the trial specifically would take a day, but the whole process would take a year. You really want to sign up for that, for the chance that maybe this gets reversed? And I got to be honest, I just don't think he has that strong of a case. Obviously, Karl thinks he has a stronger case than I do, but I would be surprised if his lawyers were advising him saying, yeah, no, that's a good idea. Go for it. You should try. I would be very surprised. But also, even if his lawyers were saying, no, don't do that, that's a bad idea, I don't think that would stop Karl at this point. Tab says, hate Billy, sure, but I don't think it's exactly fair to attack the judge, as he seemed like he did try to rule fairly in the context of the law. Unfortunately, Billy's team just played the game better. I don't want this comment to be misconstrued as Billy support, but I've seen a lot of chatter against the judge on various places. Not as much here, but it's still a decent amount. And I feel like that misses the mark. Karl says, oh, the judge was ridiculous in his judgment. You'd have to look at previous cases with similar awards. They all have doctors' testimonies backing up any health harm, etc., or specialists confirmed XYZ. Billy just said he was hurt. That is absolutely not sufficient for an award this high, and there was clear bias. He unnecessarily attacked me many times for things that he had nothing to do with the complaint. So here Karl's going pretty hard. He says the judge was ridiculous in their judgment, and there's not sufficient evidence for an award this high. I just can't imagine if he went for an appeal that any of this would play well towards that. Like all this sort of stuff, even if the judges aren't supposed to factor this stuff in, they're human. And if they see this sort of stuff, you're like, man, this guy is really obnoxious and arrogant and thinks he knows better than judges. I really don't like this guy. Tab says, I haven't read through his other cases, just the doc. Karl says, there was a similar award last year, but the guy had multiple doctor testimonies who diagnosed multiple health issues due to the statements, etc. And he'd been seeing doctors for years about it. It is ridiculous to just go and say you were hurt without any expert testimony and get this kind of judgment. It had nothing to do with reality other than the judge wanted to make an example out of me, which is not a justifiable reason. So yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. Karl said that he hoped Billy was made an example of by the judge. But now that he's been made an example, at least in his estimation, not justifiable. That's so messed up. How could that happen? And here he's talking about how, in a similar case, the guy had doctor testimony and stuff like that. Well, yeah, if the damages that you're going for are that your mental health was impacted and that sort of stuff, makes sense why you would need that, and then maybe you can get doctor's fees back and that sort of stuff. But again, the biggest thing that I took away from this court case is that the judge said, you saying that Billy contributed to Apollo Legend ended his life, that was what was seriously damaging to his reputation. So what is a doctor going to do for that? Like, sure, I get that Billy also said it messed with his mental health and that sort of stuff, but it doesn't seem like that's really what contributed to the damages. It was mostly the Apollo Legend stuff. Level 1 Psy says, the judgment seemed unprofessional to me. And Karl says, it was. It was a bad idea from the judge. You're so definitive with it. Yeah, no, it was unprofessional. Bad idea. Space Cat says, some people's jobs are literally to be expert witnesses. And Karl Jobst says, no, I'm talking actual doctors who saw the guy for years. That isn't just an expert that you pay to appear as a witness. The judge said I rarely, if ever, change my mind, and his evidence for that is that I still don't like Billy, which is so insane given the guy is suing me and has threatened to sue me over the dumbest stuff. Well, again, you didn't really have any reason to believe that what Billy did contributed to Apollo legend ending his life. And when Keemstar came to you and said, "Hey, Billy says that this is not true. It didn't have to do with him," he temporarily retracted it and then republished it. So that, to me, is a more significant demonstration of Karl refusing to change his mind. Is like he never, and at that time he still had not heard back from Apollo's brother, but that he still felt confident to republish that. That I would think is more so what the judge is referencing when he says this guy can't have his mind changed. Uh, you'd have to look at previous cases with similar awards. Robo Guy replies to, "That actually seems really bad, given that it's common law and past precedent should be a huge factor in judgment." Karl says, "It should. All similar awards were based on massive corroborated evidence from unbiased third parties, i.e., multiple doctors. This is literally just Billy said it's so, it's true." Alchemast says, "So appeal for the actual penalty seems viable." And Karl says, "Yes." Oh, really, he brings up this appeal stuff quite a bit, and he seems to think that there's merit to that. I don't think it's worth his time at all. I think it's only going to cost him time, money, stress, and it's going to prevent him from moving on from this sooner, which I would think that's what you want to do at this point. Just move on it. Take the L and move on as quickly as you can. Mayu says that's not how a judge is supposed to act, though. They're expected to behave objectively. I don't believe they did that to Karl. And Karl says showing clear bias is grounds for appeal. Again, he's saying this judge is clearly biased. I cannot imagine that this would play well. Any other judge hears about this, the appeals judge, they're just not going to like this guy. Man, he really thinks he knows better than the judges. And he thinks that he can see these things from an unbiased perspective, even though he's so emotionally and financially invested in this. But some third party, in the form of a judge, can't judge the situation unbiased. Is it really about the Apollo legend stuff, or is there something I just don't understand? Asks Immortal Nub. And Karl says, "Yes, but that question is really vague. I'm doing a video explaining everything. It's more complicated than just that." "I've done a lot of MDMA, though," says Karl. "I've heard many different versions of ego. Imagine if you could get hard on MDMA. So some of these might seem like, why is this coming up after that? Is again, I'm just trying to go in chronological order. I thought that would be the most fair way to do it. And sometimes they get a little off topic, or I guess there's not any specific topic. This is just the general chat. But it seems like they're switching subjects if you're just going through it. The conversation can move kind of fast sometimes. Okay, now we're back to the court stuff. That was a very brief detour. Karl says there are two main issues. The GoFundMe is one issue. General transparency is another. So here he's admitting that he wasn't super transparent. This is the only concerning the GoFundMe stuff. As far as people thinking it's about cheating, yes, I agree. In fact, that was part of the defense, that my original video didn't hurt Billy and his reputation is that of a cheater, which the judge granted. Excuse me. Not an Apollo murderer or whatever, and I was not going to change that. So if people are upset at me because I wasn't transparent, it could have been because of the GoFundMe or just generally. If it's for the GoFundMe, I disagree completely. If it's generally true, it's true. Or if it's generally, it's true. I wasn't transparent because it was part of my defense. Yeah, well, that's kind of why you shouldn't talk about stuff that you're actively in court for, right? Like he wants to play it both ways, where he uploads videos about Billy and talks crap about him a bunch, but then afterwards he says, "Oh, well, I couldn't talk about that part of it because it would have hurt my case." Well, continuing to make videos about Billy also hurts your case. That's part of why the judge thought that he doesn't change his mind about anything. They were arguing about the grapevine effect. that the Apollo stuff has major impacts to Billy, but no one even knew about it, and that's what we were arguing. Why would I help Billy bringing it up and letting people know about it? Billy and his lawyers were literally saying a retraction wouldn't matter, even though I did make one. You just don't know what you're talking about, unfortunately. There was nothing I could do to avoid the lawsuit. And so at one point, Billy and Karl's lawyers talked about settling. And here, I think, looking at this, you can get an idea of maybe what Karl is talking about here. I don't think he's portraying it totally honestly. I think that when he offered, like his settlement offer that included the retraction, was pretty much worthless. And here, that's because his settlement is like laughably low. We refer to our letter of event date sent to you as a concerns notice, as intimated in our instructions are to commence proceedings against you for defamation for damages. Our client will, however, not do so if the filing settlement can be achieved. The terms of any settlement with you are the deletion of the YouTube publication, which was published on or about July 25th, 2020. Your unwritten undertaking never to repeat any of the allegations contained in the video about our client or anything similar. A written apology to our client in terms which are satisfactory both to ourselves and to our client. Payment of our client's costs, which we estimate to be in the order of $1,500. Payment of compensatory damages in the sum of $150,000. This offer will remain open for 7 days and will then lapse and be incapable of acceptance. So here they're saying a retraction would have worked. It's just you can't do only the retraction. We still need some damages and stuff like that. And Karl Jobst was not down for this. So to me, it seems like he's misrepresenting that because at some point in time, a retraction would have counted for something. You know, he would have had to do more than just that. But if he would have retracted it and paid some court fees and stuff, that would have worked. And I don't know if this is exactly what he was talking about, where he's not allowed to talk about Billy, but your written undertaking never to repeat any of the allegations contained in the video about our client or anything similar. I'm not sure if that's what's being referenced, or maybe there was more back and forth in other settlement offers as time went on and it got more serious or something like that. But to me, it seems like there was a point in time where Karl could have retracted what he said, paid a much more modest fee, and moved on with his life. But he was not willing to do that. He didn't want to accept that. I saw some lawyer talking about this, and he had an email or letter, and it sounded like Karl offered $3,000 to settle things, and Billy's lawyer replied, "Well, no, that doesn't even cover the legal fees here. It just doesn't cover costs even. Why would we take $3,000?" So I think Karl was doing that sort of stuff where he was giving ridiculous terms to end these things on, and that's why he's saying a retraction wouldn't have meant anything, is because they wouldn't agree to any of his settlement offers. Okay, and that's what I just read. Billy and his lawyer were literally saying a retraction wouldn't matter, even though I did make one. Billy said it doesn't matter if I make a retraction. My lawyers told him I was going to make a retraction. He responded by saying that they would sue me anyway. So don't say a retraction would have saved me $1 million. He's very upset. Don't effing say a retraction would have saved me $1 million. He's very upset with anybody that tries to apply hindsight to this, which I get that would be very annoying in his situation. I would probably feel something like, okay, shut up, Captain Hindsight. All right. Obviously, at this point in time, I know I could have played it better. Obviously. Because, yes, I totally fed into the idea that he was suing me for cheating, especially later after I closed the GoFundMe. It was after the GoFundMe, guys. It wasn't even after I launched it and it was was after I closed it, okay? That was the only time where I wasn't very clear about it and maybe was a little bit misleading. But when I made and talked about the GoFundMe in those specific instances, I made it clear what it was for. And again, I do think he made it more clear in the video where he launched the GoFundMe, but even then, he talked about cheating a lot. And then Nuke7 applies to that, saying, I've read 2 types of comment, you misled and you're arrogant. This is why it's complicated. Even if you show people you were transparent with receipts, they're going to feel like you were talking down to them. And Karl says, I was arrogant. Yes, I'm arrogant in my videos. Everyone knows that. Obviously, if my actions cause many people to be annoyed, upset, misled, then I should have done better. So I will address that, but there are also lies. And Plantgoy, which this Plantgoy, he has some, I don't know if they were all his or he was just sharing plants that he found there, but he has some very nice plants and also a cute, I think it was a gecko, some lizard looking thing, but it was it was a cute little gecko or whatever it was. I don't think anyone thinks it was malicious, but the small subset looking for evil everywhere. And Karl says some people think it was malicious. And I can understand why people think it was malicious because he spent so much time talking about the cheating and so little time talking about the Paula Legend stuff. And it, makes me want, why did he do that so much? Because it seemed like it would either be malice or greed that he wanted to fund his GoFundMe. And I don't know. I don't know what it was that motivated him to keep talking about it more and more, but malice or greed, those seem like the most likely reasons that you would double, triple, quadruple, pentuple, sextuple, septuple, octuple, non-tuple, dectuple down on it. Karl says, I'm not very worried long term, or even that worried short term. And he's talking about the impact that all this will have on him. Like, people don't know what happened. I'll explain the whole timeline. It will be very clear. People will know what happened. Some will disagree. I never lied about why I was being sued for what the GoFundMe was for. So, no, my lawyers were even like, dude, the shit people be saying online be whack. So it's weird to me that his lawyers would talk like that, but apparently that's a quote from them. Like my video where I launched the GoFundMe, my lawyer checked that vid. My biggest sin was allowing people to think it was about cheating, but fixing that was a catch-22 because it was bad for my defense. So he wants to talk about Billy over and over and over again, but specifically the Apollo Ledger stuff, that he can't bring up because that would be bad for his case. So Wigglytuff says, what we really need is a gamer judge, and this is from the judgment. It became apparent to me during the trial that many members of the online gaming and YouTube communities are not people whom the majority of society would consider to be reasonable, at least in their manners of expression. And Karl says, that shows judge bias, by the way. Just the fact that throughout the course of the hearing or the trial, he thought, yeah, it doesn't seem like these gaming communities are super reasonable. That's clear bias. That can't just be what he honestly observed. It's bias. He's biased against gamers. Like, definitely, I effed up, obviously, but I'm not sure people understand what it's like to be sued either, and me being regarded. The combination is not good. Wigglytuff says, I understand that, but it's just never a good idea to talk about it since anything and everything can and will be used against you, which the judge did here. Karl says, but that's not what the judge is supposed to do. Are they not supposed to take anything and everything that you say and use that to assess the situation? I thought that they were supposed to do that. And that's part of why officers tell you you have the right to remain silent. Everything can and will be used against you. That's obviously in America, but I think roughly the same idea applies to Australia. Karl says the judge is supposed to weigh what's complained of versus the defense. Me being an arrogant F-wit is irrelevant. So at least he admits again, he did earlier, that he's arrogant, but it doesn't really do so much after the fact. He wants to complain about other people having hindsight. Well, you admitting that you're arrogant after the fact, not very helpful. If you could have looked inside and noticed you were doing that at the time and stopped doing it, that very well could have helped you. But he didn't do that. And if the judge is biased because of that, then it's grounds for appeal. So he's very insistent. This judge is very biased, and I could win an appeal because of that. When the judge does something they aren't supposed to, you appeal. Of course I'm talking to them about appealing. The response vid would not be monetized or sponsored, obviously. It's clear the judge doesn't like me, but it's a bad idea for a judge to make that clear in his judgment. And Alice Smithy says, or he posts something else from the judgment. Mr. Jobst contended that they did not reinstate Billy's scores because Twin Galaxies only agreed to record his scores in its newly created historical database, not on its competitive leaderboard where they had originally been recorded. But the fact is that they are records achieved many years later, but they are now recognized by each body as having been world records by Mr. Mitchell. I consider that both bodies reinstated the record that Mr. Mitchell had achieved. So, in the Billy Mitchell Twin Galaxies lawsuit, they settled, and part of the agreement was, okay, well, we're not going to keep you on the, the current world record leaderboards, but we're going to have like an archived historical leaderboard that you'll be included on. And so that's what the judge is talking about here. Terror Crash says, well, he's the judge. You can't do anything about it. Alan Smithy says, because the judge is a moron and he should be out of a job. Karl says, you can appeal, though. Like the judge can't do anything without repercussions. The appeal is looked at by multiple judges. I'm not saying 100% I'm appealing, but I'm certainly looking at it. Appeal is probably likely. The judge also just made factual errors about evidence given. And one of those things I think they're talking about is that the Twin Galaxy records was recognized by the judge, but obviously the Billy Mitchell haters are saying no, they weren't recognizing it. That's some nonsense BS archive leaderboard that they kept him on. Didn't Billy say in the Twin Galaxies deposition that the damages to Twin Galaxies did were far greater than those in his other lawsuits? I think I read something in the judgment too, but it still somehow ended on high damages. Karl says, yes, he did. He said he was just talking about cheating videos, but he was asked specifically about lawsuits, and mine and David Race's lawsuits were not about cheating. Terra Crash says, so he changed the topic. Well, that's a first. Karl says, not in the deposition. He just retconned it in trial. So now the judge is biased or retconned. They hate gamers. Knock says, do you intend, or Nuke, I'm not sure about that. By the way, do you intend to talk about the judge and that it was biased or something in the video? I'm guessing not, but just in case. And Karl says, nope, which good call. Definitely don't want to be talking about how the judge was biased and you lost the case unfairly in this video. That would be showing just absolutely zero humility. Keep that to your Discord. Don't put that on the video that potentially 1 million people are going to see. This vid is outlining the timeline of what happened before I was sued, the GoFundMe, me allowing people to think it was about cheating. Here, once again, he's admitting that he's saying here, that's very soft language. He allowed people to think it was about cheating, not that he led or misled, anything like that. He just allowed people to think that. Who knows how they came to those conclusions? He just didn't set them straight. He didn't say, whoa, 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 no, you're wrong about that. It's actually this. Alan Smithy says 300,000 in damages did not occur. Karl says the damages absolutely do not make sense, and you can't find a similar case anywhere near this without corroborating testimony from medical experts, etc. Well, I'm curious how similar this case that he keeps referencing really is, because I don't think in this case that the defendant accused the other person of contributing to the death of somebody. Maybe they did, but I wouldn't think so. And again, that's what so much of this hinged on. Plantgoy says, again, I agree, but that's the legal logic. Karl says, there was no legal logic as to why it was that high. So now the judge isn't even using legal logic. They're just pulling this out of nowhere. There's no precedent. They're biased. They hate gamers. He was not claiming economical loss. Terra Crash says, the funny thing is that your case was about cheating. Nothing else I can say unless Billy hires some professional lawsuit against you, Karl. And Karl says, that is an economical loss. Here, Karl is replying to Wigglytuff, who said, are there any grounds for mistrial? I don't know how it works in Australia versus US, but biased judge and incompetent counsel seem like grounds for doing that. And Karl says there is likely grounds for appeal, and they may dismiss the complaint. I can't say the likelihood of success, but based on the judgment and trial, it does seem likely there will be good grounds for appeal, but it needs to be assessed. It's very rare for an appeal to cause a new trial. Much more likely would be them simply dismissing the original complaint, or not, or reducing the damages. All the evidence has been presented at trial. There is no reason for a trial to happen again. The appeal court can look at the existing evidence and come to a different conclusion if they want. Then here asks, did the judge say what I said in the summary? Surely the judge did, right? Do you remember if the judge actually said what I said in his summary? And here, I think I have this. Yeah. And this is where they timestamped it too.
He also said the following about Mr. Mitchell. Quote, he also sued YouTuber Apollo Legend for $1 million. I haven't spoken about this publicly, but this lawsuit ultimately ended with Apollo giving in and settling with Mitchell. He was forced to remove all his videos about Mitchell's cheating and paid him a large sum of money. This left him deeply in debt, which required him to find extra work. But with his ongoing health issues, this was all too much of a burden, and he ultimately took his own life. Not that Billy Mitchell would ever care, though. In fact, when Billy Mitchell thought Apollo died earlier, he expressed joy at the thought. The lawsuit against Apollo was just as frivolous as the rest, and Apollo definitely would have won in court. But again, he was extremely ill and couldn't handle the ongoing stress. End quote.
So there's the quote that Karl was asking if the judge mentioned. To timestamp, he read it verbatim. Karl says, okay, so those are the words, thanks, because most people won't actually know the words I said. No, I mean, a lot of people watched this. That's how a lot of people heard about Karl losing the case, as they watched the full video or clips of it. So I do think a good amount of people heard that that's what Karl said. Like, even that is wrong. I never said anything about him being depressed. I said he was stressed and couldn't handle the lawsuit, which is true. He admitted that himself. So now here it sounds like Karl is saying that the judge is misquoting him, just straight up saying that he said things he didn't. And I don't remember exactly what Karl said in his video, and I don't know exactly which one it is. But I at least remember Karl saying the part where, not that Billy Mitchell would care, though. I don't think the judge said my retraction in the stream, did he? Plant Guy says, yes, it was at the end of a long video with no context to it. Karl says, sorry, it's kind of painful, so I don't watch the judge's vid. Oh man, that's rough. He can't even watch the video. It's too painful to relive that moment. That's why I'm asking instead of just watching it. I gave the context in my retraction. I said I made a video. I said this was wrong. Sorry for giving wrong info. Apollo's decision was his own responsibility. What do you mean when you say my retraction had no context? I mean it was 28 minutes into a video. It wasn't because I was trying to hide the retraction intentionally. I just didn't want to ruin the vid it was in. Hours of content about his cheating and lawsuits, one paragraph about Apollo. So Karl says, oh, I wasn't trying to hide it or downplay it or anything like that. I just didn't want to ruin the video with it. Well, I think he should have dedicated a video to it, even if that's a ruined video then, because he made a lot of noise, a lot more noise about Billy doing this. You should try to make roughly the same amount of noise making the retraction. And the vast, vast majority of people do not watch YouTube videos in their entirety. Like, you're almost never going to have a video with anywhere near 100% retention rate. It would have to be like a 10-second video that's super engaging. You know, like some TikToks might get roughly 100% retention, but a half-hour YouTube video is never going to get anywhere near that, even if it is a good video that lots of people like and are engaged. A lot of people just get bored and click off. So putting it 28 minutes into a video, you're not trying to make the same amount of noise to reverse what you said. Nuke says that's the thing. We know that. People who didn't pay attention, not that much. Karl says, this is why my response vid, I will show emails from me to my lawyer when I say I want this to get as many views as possible, as I was making the vid for the retraction. Well, again, it doesn't matter. Even if the video gets lots of views, even if the video gets 1 million views, it's going to be a relatively small percentage of those people that see the last 2 minutes, especially because after the main subject of the video, it fades to black and then fades back in with him saying that. Once it fades to black, a lot of people are like, oh, that must be the end of the video. Because, the whatever topic he was talking about came to its natural conclusion within that video, and then it fades to black. So a lot of people are like, all right, next video, if they even made it that far. I even suggested to my lawyers I show those emails, and they didn't care. Like, seriously, they really didn't value my input much. It was pretty effed. Yeah, weird that the lawyers wouldn't value your input all that much. Almost as if you don't regard their input very much, and you just keep releasing videos about Billy Mitchell throughout the course of the trial, right? Like, and I don't know if the lawyers made him believe that he had a good shot at winning this. I would think any lawyer worth their salt would at least tell him he has a very good chance of losing this, and it's better to settle. But Karl did not want to settle. They thought they were going to win easily because Billy is a liar and his case is stupid. They were complacent because they thought we were going to win, but the judge just lapped up everything Billy gave him. So remember, before he was saying his lawyers were very good and smart. Well, now they're complacent and lazy because they just assumed they were going to win. I would be so surprised if the lawyers were just assuming they were going to win. Because Billy had a pretty strong case with the Apollo Legend stuff. If it was about cheating, I could see why the lawyers would rest on their laurels or whatever and not take it super seriously. Because, yeah, that would probably be an easy win. I would be so surprised if the lawyers were complacent and just assuming that they'd win this. What's going on there? Okay, not sure why that one go to the next one there, but I think the judge is applying the law wrong here, possibly. We don't need to show that he had a reputation, just that the imputation arises, that he expressed joy over Apollo's death. The judge seemed to be saying that we also need to show the actual damages of that imputation in the public. Well, even if we believe that Billy expressed joy over Apollo's death, which from those text messages he was, yeah, I would agree with that. That's not the same as hounding somebody to ending their life. And I would say hounding somebody to death is worse than laughing at somebody dying or being excited about it. There was basis. The basis was just poor. It was a Reddit post from someone who said he spoke with Apollo, and it was credible because he knew about the settlement before it happened. So here, Karl is talking about his source for saying that Apollo Legend ended his life because of Billy Mitchell. It was a Reddit post from someone who said he spoke with Apollo, and it was credible because he knew about the settlement before it happened. It was a Reddit post from someone who said he spoke with Apollo. So we're levels removed there, and it's a Reddit comment. And he's saying it's credible because he knew about the settlement before it happened. Well, even if the guy had some true insider information about something, doesn't mean you can take everything he says as fact, right? Like, there's plenty of Redditors out there that have gotten one thing right and then spout a bunch of nonsense. As I say in this response video, my standards for evidence has risen since this incident, and it wasn't good enough to make claims based on what I had at the time. At least he admits that now. And then Thunda provides the fourth imputation that'll be referenced here shortly. The imputation that Mr. Mitchell had callously expressed joy at the thought of Apollo Legend's death was made and was substantially true. I think the judge must be wrong about the fourth imputation not arising from evidence, or rather not being in comments. Because I remember on my video there were lots of comments about Billy being happy Apollo was dead and them being disgusted by that. There were definitely heaps of comments where people were pissed about those texts. Yeah, there were definitely comments about those texts, which should be in evidence, so the judge is just wrong if he thinks there's only a couple mentions of it in evidence. Alan Smithy says, your barrister brought that up, didn't he? And Carl says, no, they didn't talk about the comments under my video about the texts. I mean, why would they need to, really, though, right? It's just, we're just trying to prove that Billy was callous about this, no? But I'm reading some of them, and they're definitely there. Chris says, I'm honestly worried that even if Carl does make the video, it's too late. No one's going to want to watch it because the court of public opinion's already made its verdict and rules in favor of Billy Mitchell. Carl says, no one is going to watch my response to losing a $400K lawsuit? What planet are you on? It doesn't matter if I release it in a week or a year. People will want to know how I respond. That sounds pretty arrogant. In a year, I don't think I would care. If it comes out in the next couple weeks, yeah, I would definitely care then. But a year later, it's like, okay, well, the fact that it took you a year to come up with this, I don't know. It seems like you don't have anything that good. Otherwise, you would have come out with it right away. I'm sure some people would still care, but not nearly as many. It would be a fraction of the people. YouTube drama news moves fast. Chris says, fair enough. I just worry a ton of people have already made up their minds without getting the full story, as people on the internet are wont to do. Carl says, that's just not how it has worked historically on YouTube, in my opinion. People are very responsive to good videos. Chris says, fair enough. Though I suppose it does mean you might have to cut back on the investigative journalism videos for a bit. Definitely best to keep Billy Mitchell's name out of your mouth from now on, because now he knows he can hurt you and will look for any excuse to go after you again. Like I've seen dozens of people say that Carl lied about the GoFundMe, when really he didn't. Carl says, I don't think Billy wants to or could afford going through this again anytime soon. Well, it's just a matter of how fast you pay him, right? if you pay him up, he'll be able to afford lots of stuff. Chris says, true, he might just want to decide to quit while he's ahead. Carl says, he isn't ahead. Only people who will win is the lawyers. And this to me just is so delusional. How is he possibly going to say Billy Mitchell isn't ahead right now? He just won a court case that's going to cost you like over $1 million Australian dollars. He 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 won a court case against you that everybody assumed he was going to lose. How is he not ahead? This to me just comes across again as super arrogant. Like Carl is not really willing to admit that Billy's ahead of him after this. Just delusional, honestly. Chris replies, I'm curious though, outside of the reputation damages, how much will this damage you in the long run? I know you said you were prepared for the worst case scenario, but I just want to make sure you and your family will be all right financially after this. Carl says, there is no way in knowing how it will affect me long term. That depends on the public. Chris says, fair enough. You do kind of have to rely on a good reputation to make a living on YouTube, and Billy's win essentially torpedoing that reputation might cause a hit in your YouTube revenue. And Carl replies, just FYI, you're being a bit insensitive at the moment. So that hurt Carl's feeling that Chris said, well, Billy's win kind of torpedoed your reputation, Gar. And this is not Carl that liked this. I don't think it was Chris either. I think it was some random person. But that might be my favorite interaction that I found going through the Discord is Chris saying, Billy's win essentially torpedoed your reputation and might cause a hit to your YouTube revenue. And Carl straight up has to tell him, you're being a bit insensitive at the moment. He's too proud to say, oh, that's kind of hurtful or anything like that. No, you're being insensitive, man. Man Terrafordens says, or he's replying to somebody else who said, doesn't Carl calling himself an arrogant F-wit indicate that he's pretty self-aware at minimum? I mean, not really. Like, it doesn't require very much self-awareness at all to recognize arrogance. I would say it's a very, very small self-awareness requirement there. But man, Tara Fordens says it can, but without knowing much about Karl, I think he wears his arrogance as a fashion accessory. He thinks it's cool to mouth off about the judge in public and generally act like a jackass while he's being critiqued with a fine-tooth comb by someone who has the ability to hand him a judgment that could end up putting him in the hole for nearly 1 mil. All said. I'm not giving Karl legal advice, but it seems the Discord memes weren't worth it, and losing that money was anything but cool. Karl really should have recognized the very real danger that Billy's lawsuit posed to him because the Apollo stuff was really damning for Karl. Kind of insane that Karl would be so flippant about his trial when this surely was in the back of his mind the entire time. He's right about one thing, his lawyers sucked because they should have hired someone to sneak up behind Karl and put a muzzle on his Twitter account. Well, I don't think they can actually force Karl to stop talking. And maybe they didn't, but I would imagine that they told him, hey, you should just keep quiet about this until it's all settled. But Karl says, if the judge doesn't like me and that affects his decision, that is grounds for appeal. Man, if you're going to be, by your own admission, an arrogant F-twit, you at the very least have to recognize that that's never going to help you and has a very good chance of harming you. Yeah, they're supposed to be unbiased and not factor that sort of stuff in. Or I don't even know if that's true. Like, if someone's being arrogant and it seems like they're not willing to consider that they were wrong, that they shouldn't have said or done things, I can understand why that would contribute to a harsher sentence. Maybe they're not supposed to do that. I don't know. But regardless, even if they're not supposed to factor that in, you have to realize best case scenario, it has no impact, and worst case scenario, it makes things worse for you. Cal Farmer says, that's the dumbest thing ever. If the judge doesn't like me, the judge doesn't give two craps about you, or Billy. Karl says, yes, you have to show bias in an appeal. If it's apparent, you'd have to demonstrate it. Man, Tara Fordarns says, yeah, like nobody is saying this is inherently good. I think Billy deserved to get the worst of it because, in my opinion, his lawsuit was clearly malicious. Well, do you think any of Karl's actions were malicious along the way? But ultimately, you're asking the judge to be biased in your favor. That's literally what a trial is. We don't say that part out loud, but pissing off the judge is the fast track to exposing and amplifying your critical weaknesses. And I think this is a solid point. Where he's like, maybe we're saying the quiet part out loud or whatever, but you're trying, in this court case, you're trying to sell yourself to the judge as best that you can. You're trying to win them over. And acting the way that you're acting is never going to do that. So if it is true that the judge is not supposed to factor any of that in, you're still being dumb. You're still shooting yourself in the foot. Karl says the judge commented on many things outside the scope of the complaint. R3 says, after reviewing the document, I am unclear as to how that figure was determined to be that high. In my view, individuals outside the gaming community are likely unfamiliar with Billy, aside from his role in Donkey Kong and his appearance in the Adam Sandler film. It is even less likely that they would recognize Karl. Ooh. Within the gaming community, however, Billy is a divisive figure. I believe that Karl's coverage of Billy's endeavors and his involvement in Billy's other legal battles ultimately had a detrimental impact, and Karl was ultimately forced to bear a significant cost as a result. Karl says, which was outside the scope of the complaint. The damages amount is certainly worth considering very seriously for appeal. He seems very set on this appeal. He brings it up day after day in here. It's right now we're at like 7 days after the trial. Billy had to lie so much, and the judge ignored Billy, saying what I did was minimal and his business was doing better since my video. Because business doing better shows no reputational loss, and Billy said his business was doing worse in trial. Well, his business doing better does not show that there was no reputational loss, right? Maybe a business could be doing so well that some bad news about them coming out negatively impacts them, but it doesn't stop the company from growing, right? Maybe it just slowed their growth down. Alchemist says, not necessarily. Businesses can be impacted by outside factors. Carl says, to show reputational harm. Tell that to the judge then. I have to defend myself, the GoFundMe stuff, but especially later on, I shouldn't have talked so much about trial without making it clear what it was about. Yeah, obviously. Obviously, there's a reason people are upset. I feel some of it is justified and some of it is not. Wow, that's great insight. Wait, you could say that about literally any time there's outrage ever. Some of it is justified and some of it is not. Nuke says, or he replies to Carl saying, and the other is more general about people not understanding what the lawsuit was about. Nuke says, that's the biggest concern. Aside from the actual haters, I don't think people think the GoFundMe was a scam for money. However, people not understanding isn't a good approach. I didn't realize I made it clear enough works better, in my opinion. Carl says, yes, of course. I am happy to concede that. People do think the GoFundMe was a scam, though, unless you think that is just haters. I mean, I do think that's just haters. I think there are a decent number of people who think that people would have been less inclined to donate if they knew that it was about the Apollo Legend stuff. I've heard a good amount of critiques roughly around that area. I have not really heard very many people at all say that the GoFundMe was a straight up scam. I think that is just the haters pretty much. Kaboom says the most common theme is people being misinformed. Carl says, I'd say uninformed is better. I don't think it's uninformed because you talked about the case over and over and over again. You informed people about the case. It's not that they had no information about it, it's that the information that they were given was misleading. It made everybody think that this was about Billy being a cheater. But he wants to say it's that they were uninformed. Like what? Just because they could have gone and read court documents, that means they're uninformed? I mean, most people are not ever going to do that, right? They're going to go off of the stuff that you say in, maybe one or two of your videos. Some people will watch more than that. And if they do that, they're going to get the wrong idea from what Carl says. It's not that they're uninformed. The uninformed people don't really know that this happened, right? The people who followed it, I think, were misinformed. Yeah, they were led to believe that this was about Billy cheating, and that's not the case. I do not think it's that they were uninformed. Test lead says, I think the Apollo stuff was mentioned much less than cheating stuff, so people felt misled since they weren't as invested and were just casual. Like it's easy for me to say I knew all along for this, but for this many people to feel this way, I don't know, something must be wrong. Carlos says, I didn't give people misinfo, I just didn't give them enough. So sure, if you want to say I didn't spread misinformation, I could be more agreeable to that, but that doesn't mean that people weren't misinformed, right? I think people were misinformed because he talked way too much about the cheating stuff. I don't think that Carl lied and specifically said, hey, the only thing that this is about is Billy cheating, but he informed them in a way that misled them. So people were misinformed. Pyrus says, I mean, the problem, why it is such a huge thing, in my opinion, is that Carl blasted the completionist for misleading, and then it looked, not that he is on the same level, but looked like to have done the same. I mean, you cultivate your audience with your content. Bringing justice means you need to uphold the same standard that you hold others accountable for. Carl says, wait, what? Pyrus says, not the fraud thing, but the misleading part. Carl says, the completionist just straight up lied for years. I never lied at all. Carl's resentful of the comparisons to the completionist, which, to be fair, I don't think what he did was like the completionist. Completionist told people that he was donating all of their money, all of their subs, their bits to charity that he'd been working with. I think with some university for years and that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, he straight up lied, and I don't think Carl did that necessarily. Plot guy says, "Oh, this is a good part. This is." Can I ask something since you are here? Genuine question. So, what was the impression you had as to the exact nature of you being pushed by Billy legally initially? It was always about cheating, from my perspective. Wait, so if it was always about cheating from your perspective, why would you be surprised that other people thought that? You thought it was about cheating? I mean, I'm assuming he's just talking about the first lawsuit or something like that. But I don't know. That seems weird to me that it was always about cheating from his perspective. And then he's surprised that other people came away with that idea. Okay, this is the one I was thinking of here. This is a really funny question. Plotkoy asked Karl, "Do you think racists should go to jail and have their stuff taken? I believe you held those feelings at one point." And Karl says, "What the hell? No idea what you are talking about. You have completely confused me with someone else." Plotkoy says, "Oh, that's good." And then Robo Guy asks, where'd you get that?" And Plantkoy says, "Bad Kino Casino gossip." I'm assuming that's what he means by casino. Bad Kino Casino gossip, apparently. I can get the timestamp where I heard it, lol, if I can figure it out on phone. Bad info, though. And then Carl replies that, "I don't really want you to post videos about me." Not interested in seeing it at the moment. And Plantkoy says, "I'm not, don't worry." Which, if he is referencing Kino Casino, I definitely believe that Carl would not want to see that right now. The Kino Casino went pretty hard on Carl, and it was very entertaining. If you enjoy seeing people crap on Karl Jobst, you should definitely watch Kino Casino's video about it. Very entertaining. Rory Blackburn says, "Carl, I hope you aren't taking too much Valium now. It sucks to lose, but you can bounce right back." He says, "Thanks. I've been pretty good with it, to be honest." So that's weird because I assumed this was like a prescription thing where, you take it once a day at the same time or something like that. But the way Rory talks, it seems like he's spent some time in the Discord and he knows that Carl uses Valium sort of willy-nilly. That's how it comes across to me. I'm not saying that Carl does that. But that's how that comes across. And Rory is worried. He's like, "Oh, geez, man, I know things are rough right now. I really hope you're not abusing the Valium. I hope you're not taking too much to take the edge off." But Carl says, "Thanks, I've been pretty good with it, to be honest." And that response to me kind of also implies that he doesn't just use it once a day at the same time or something like that. Man, and I don't know what his prescription would be, but I'm just saying that for example. It seems like Carl takes it according to his own taste somewhat. That, to me, is how that comes across. Bamboo Harvester replies to Carl saying, "Probably me just providing all the info will fix most things." Bamboo says, "Carl, I mean this really nicely, and I want you to be able to move on from this, but you are so emotionally invested in this, it might be hard to be objective. You're too close to the action, understandably, to have the level of detachment necessary to do the appropriate damage limitation. There's nothing unusual in that, it's a normal human reaction. It's great to hear you are running this past lawyers for legal aspects, but please be careful not to dig yourself any deeper in the court of public opinion sense." And Carl says, "I don't understand how I could dig myself deeper." Which, I mean, it would be hard, I think, for him to dig himself deeper, but with how arrogant this guy is, I wouldn't put it past him. He goes on to say, "My responses are usually pretty level-headed." And here, Pixie Chick says, "Not gonna lie, the judge was smart, but in the end, the verdict came from a grump. Billy wasn't defamed at all. What did he lose? Did Carl's video change anybody's opinion of Billy? No, everybody already hated him, and now people probably hate him more." So I feel like they're ruining their own argument, saying it wasn't defamation. People probably hate him more. Okay, so that seems like there was defamation, though, right? They hated him a certain amount before Carl made his videos, and then afterwards they hate him more. But Carl replies, "Pixie Chick is right. The judge was a grumpy pants." So all throughout this, leading up to the case, he says the judge is smart, the judge is badass, the judge is switched on. As soon as he loses the case, the judge is biased. They hate gamers. They're commenting on things outside of the scope of the case. They're grumpy. just completely on a dime, flipped. As soon as the verdict dropped, he's like, oh, no, this judge that I was saying good things about before, they're worthless now. And then here, this is just proving that the AI thing, it really was in his Discord. Okay, so here is what's interesting. We fed the court transcripts in AI. It said that there's no scenario where I lose. It said even if Billy wins, the damages will be nominal and he will have to pay my costs. The AI was quite good. Well, I don't know. I would imagine Carl has changed his opinion about that too. Now the AI was probably biased, right? The AI is a grumpy pants. The AI hates gamers. And again, he's saying, I am considering appealing. Yes. Raya asks, are you going to start another GoFundMe for it? Carl says, no. Doing a GoFundMe would be in very poor taste. I would fund my own appeal. Which, yeah, that would be in terrible, terrible taste to try to do a GoFundMe for his appeal. That would actually dig himself deeper. That's one of the things that he could do that would dig himself deeper. But yeah, so that was the journey through Carl's Discord from a few months leading up to the trial, up until days before, and then the week or so afterwards. I thought, especially some of that stuff towards the end, was very entertaining. The plant guy taking what Kino Casino said at like face value and asking Carl, do you think racists should be jailed and having everything taken away? I know that had nothing to do with this, but I found that hilarious. So yeah, hopefully you got something out of that.